What is trauma and what can we do about it? Now, certainly that is a huge question, and it's one that here at the Mighty Oaks Foundation we deal with just about every single day. If you have been following us, you know that our organization is committed to serving veterans, active duty service members, first responders, and the spouses of those who have dealt with some kind of trauma in their lives. Now, most of the time, that trauma is connected to something with their jobs. Maybe it's combat or something else in the first responder community. That trauma, the traumatic event that those folks go back to as causing the struggles in their lives, happened while they were doing their jobs. What I know, though, is that trauma is not reserved simply for those in those career fields. Trauma is not something that's reserved for those who've been in combat or those who are serving in the first responder community. Trauma is something that all of us can identify with. Just about everything in our lives has some traumatic aspect of it if we're honest with ourselves. We look at even the process of birth and the process of raising kids once they're born, and so many of the things we deal with in our lives we could look at and say are traumatic. But what is trauma? I mean, really, what is trauma? And then understanding what it is, what can we do about it? We could spend a long time discussing this today. I want to give you a thought, though, that may spur some additional thoughts and help you to move forward a little bit in your own life if trauma is something you're struggling with. We're told clinically that trauma has a very specific definition. In fact, we go to the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, version 5. This is what those in the world of clinical psychiatry and psychology and therapy would go to for their definitions. That trauma requires a few things. I'll read it to you. Trauma requires actual or threatened death, serious injury, or sexual violence. Actual or threatened death, serious injury, or sexual violence. And I think all of us could agree that any of those things would be considered traumatic. Here's the problem. So many of us are dealing with things in our lives that we would say are traumatic, but that don't have those elements. There's no death. There's no perceived death, no injury or perceived injury, no sexual violence. None of those things exist. And so what we're dealing with must not be that bad because it doesn't fit the definition. I think definitions are helpful and they're important, certainly in a clinical setting. But they're only as helpful as they provide a bridge for us to get to a place of healing and hope and help. The definition's good, but it's only good if it gets us to the place where we really need to be. There's another definition that I love of trauma. It's not a clinical definition, but it's a very helpful one. Trauma is an event or series of events that pushes one beyond their ability to cope. Did you get that? An event or a series of events that pushes one beyond their ability to cope. Again, I understand this is a huge conversation. Those who have been through extremely traumatic events psychologically, emotionally, many times in their relationships, even physically, there are impacts to their lives. I understand that. But what I also understand is that many people dismiss the hardships that they've been through, the traumas they've experienced, because they don't fit within a very narrow definition. And so an expanded definition helps us to understand that the hardships we deal with in our life that push us beyond our ability to cope, it can be something that seems small to the rest of the world, but to us, it's the thing, the wall in front of us that prevents us from moving forward. That's a trauma that needs to be dealt with. And it's okay. Because experiencing trauma and hardship in our lives doesn't make us unique somehow or even odd somehow. It makes us human. To struggle is to be human. It's good to know that. To experience something that pushes you beyond your ability to cope is traumatic. So what do you do about it? There are so many things that we could talk about, so many things that we could suggest. Our programs are a week long, and then we work with folks for sometimes years beyond that in our aftercare programs to help them move beyond the traumas that they've experienced. But I think one of the most important things an individual can do, if they've dealt with something traumatic, that thing that's pushed them beyond their ability to cope, probably the most important thing they can do, the starting point, is to take personal responsibility for their situation. Now, I'm not saying they take personal responsibility for the trauma. So often the traumas that come into our lives come from someone or something outside of our control. I'm not saying take responsibility for the trauma, but take responsibility for your life, where you are right now. What happened to you may have been out of your control, but how you deal with that and what you do now, that's entirely in your control. Take responsibility. Begin building on a foundation of faith. We have been created, and the Creator has a plan for our lives, and we need to move toward that plan. We need to live in line with what He's created us to be and to do. And as we're able to do that, to align to that plan, the traumas that have control over us, the traumas that have pushed us beyond our ability to cope, no longer have that control. It doesn't mean they're gone. It doesn't mean we forget about them. It just means they no longer have control over us. And we can begin moving forward because we're standing on a solid foundation of faith. What can you do in the face of trauma? Acknowledge it, accept it as being part of being human, take responsibility for what happens next, begin building on a foundation of faith, and start moving forward. There may be people that you need to include in that, or conversations that need to be had. Perhaps there are programs or organizations or other things that you can reach out to, but be responsible and move forward into those things, trusting that that trauma, although it happened, although it hurts, it can be used as you continue to take one step after another to make you a person who can help others who may be dealing with something very similar to what you're struggling through. This is a huge conversation. It's one that we have often and one that takes a lot of time. We couldn't cover it all right now, but I encourage you, whatever you're dealing with, there is hope and there is help. Don't look around and say, no one knows what this is like. A lot of people know. Don't look around and say, there is no way I can move forward. You can, if only you will. Perhaps you're a veteran or an active duty service member. Maybe you're in the first responder community. Why don't you reach out to us? You can go to our website, mightyoaksprograms.org. There's a place you can apply for a program, other helps that you can get. Perhaps you're not in one of those communities, but you're struggling as well. Go to the website. There are helps for you as well. And if you can't find it there, let us know and we'll plug you into the right place. We'd love to be a help and an encouragement to you. Our lives here at Mighty Oaks have been devoted to helping those who are struggling to move forward into the purpose for which they were created. There's hope for you. Get up, take one step, take another step, keep moving, and you'll get to the destination that God has planned for your life.